ladies and gentlemen. I never thought that I would be streaming anything for Stormgate again, and really I'm not actually streaming anything for Stormgate. What's happening here is I'm taking the opportunity that Stormgate has provided by mentioning their 3v3 Mayhem mode, which is going to be some combination of more MOBA-like or RTS-light elements, combine it with an RTS, and this MOBA-RTS, or whatever it's going to be, in Team 3v3 in the Mayhem mode is going to be their possibly last-ditch effort to get a bunch of casual players involved in the game, get a lot of people interested in the game, and there's already been some concerns and the crestfallen consternation of multiple people on Reddit and Discord as to what this would actually look like based on the feedback that we have received from the developers. Now, I'm going to put in a couple of qualifiers here. One, I am not part of the, once again, hashtag not in the beta. I do not have access to Team Mayhem, to the 3v3 Mayhem mode. I have no understanding as to what is actually going on there beyond the publicly revealed resources that everyone can access and peruse at their own leisure. So the second thing that I want to say is this is not going to be a critique about whether or not 3v3 should be a MOBA or an RTS, or whether it is too casual or anything like. Rather, this is an opportunity to use the thought space that has been provided by the introduction of Mayhem as a concept to Stormgate to introduce the idea of what I would do if I were designing a 3v3 MOBA-RTS. This is equal parts trying to put my stamp on things and influence the community, but also the other part of this is going to be, and the other equal part, you should say, is to make sure that I have some idea what the considerations are and the concerns that are being brought up, and that I make sure that I address them and give it my own best attempt for it. After all, this is, to me, a glorified thought experiment. Now, it is a glorified thought experiment that, spoilers I'll reveal later, I have actually taken a stab at before, and I have seen other games take a stab at before as well, but I thought that this would provide, at the very least, some interesting feedback and a sounding board for conversation on the Discord and on Reddit, and possibly, although I doubt that this will happen, any feedback that the developers themselves would like to provide. This tea is fire, by the way. Alright, so first thing about a 3v3 MOBA-RTS is that we've already set in one of the initial constraints, and we're going to be, by the way, I first saw this methodology used by IMLS. I've seen it by other people as well. It's just clever to give people some visual as you're coming up with thoughts when you might be coming up with them extemporaneously. You're just coming up with the stuff on the fly. You're not actually introducing these things on a topic list one at a time with PowerPoint slides that you can view in. And while that will make this go a bit longer, hopefully that means that there are more nuggets of wisdom and random off-the-cuff insights or things that you find are intriguing. So we're going to go ahead and use this format of having a paint file. I have a difficult time seeing it if it's white, and also here's what happens if this is colored white. Look at my eyes. Yeah, do you see that? I'd rather you not see that. There you go. So you can see a little bit more easily if we do it this way. So the first thing we've done here is that we've already decided basically on the outset, and here let's make sure this looks good on stream size. We can't make it white color. It should be a black color. That's probably a bit too small, so we'll just increase the size to 24. That seems good. First thing that we're doing when you have a 3v3 is that you've already determined that the player count is 6 and the team size is 3. Now, you're not here for fucking banging insights like seeing the number and confirming it's the same, but let's think about what that actually means. So, if it is a 3v3 game, one of your stated goals for if you are following this MOBA-RTS trend is there's a couple of questions, but first you have to get all the way down to team size, and the first question is, how do we want the teams to be oriented? What I mean by that is, we have a question of, do we want player elimination? Now, if we're using Team Mayhem as an example, then the answer to that is no. They do not want player elimination. And in fact, someone on the Discord and on Reddit made a compelling point as to why this is the case. It's because if you have 3 bases for each team, we were just going to draw a couple of boxes, get used to this. We're going to be doing a lot of this, actually. But if you have a map and it looks like this, and we have, I don't know, let's make it a more neutral color. There we go. If you have a map and it looks like this, and you have 3v3, and the teams are as follows, and you change the shapes, let's just say to triangles, although we're going to make a special use case for what circles, triangles, and squares actually mean later. So if you have 3v3 and the bases are here, 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 and here, and then for the other team, the bases are here, here and here, ignoring the fact that this isn't symmetrical and it's already violating some people's willing suspension of disbelief, then it's not really a 3v3, is it? What it really is all 3 teams there's going to be a coordinated effort. Yes, sometimes you can play in the broad team structure, but actually the best way to play, and this is the reason 2v2 doesn't allow double Zerg on purpose in StarCraft Brood War, is that what you do is you just have, oh my gosh, the size of that is fucking terrible. You just have all 3 players attack a single opponent like this, right? And then once they've attacked that opponent and eliminated them, here's the giant arrow indicating the pain bow that's coming this way. Once they've attacked that player, it's really now become a 3v2, right? I'm not proficient in wording with paint, but it becomes a 3v2. And 3v2, yes, you might not have quite the tech, and usually it is accepted in 3v3 where there's individual player elimination that one of these players will just accept that they're going to get eliminated, and the other player will have some kind of harass tactic that they can use, right? They'll have some kind of drop they can use to attack this person. They can have some kind of all-in that hits that person uniquely. Otherwise, you get this tug of war in the center. So what really happens in any 3v3 that I've seen of any decent level is that one player gets knocked out almost immediately and is struggling to survive in any meaningful context. And then one of the players on the team that did the 3v1 is actually knocked down or denigrated in their abilities or reduced in their capabilities to such an extent that they actually can't play anymore. So if we don't want player elimination, then this also avoids the thing that we see in the multiplayer format of the game of Magic the Gathering in Commander. Now, for those of you who don't know, Commander is the worst format of Magic. I mean, it is another format of Magic the Gathering. That's right, just so you know where we stand on this. Commander is a format of Magic the Gathering that is, again, played by 4 people, and we'll just go ahead and draw this to indicate the 4 players. And the problem with Commander is that it's a free-for-all environment, so all of these players are actually, we'll just go take the time, all of these players in Commander are actually, here, we'll do this to make it a little bit easier for the people who may have some vision problems, right? But what this really means, right, is in Commander, it is a 4-way free-for-all, and we see this problem happen in Commander with player elimination as well. And in fact, the design of a lot of sets seems to correspond to not wanting a lot of Commander products is to design to not allow player elimination. Because here's what happens. In theory, it is a 4-way free-for-all game, and players can attack each other in any angle that they want. The player with this square can attack this way, and then the player who's red can decide that they want to attack this person because they're the threat, and then this person can decide that they actually want to attack over this way. But there's no rules stating who you attack and why you attack them. You can attack whoever for whatever reason you want. Now, the social construct of Commander means that players don't do what I'm about to draw. Overwhelmingly, players don't do this, right? Where they just all decide to attack one person and eliminate them because it is a social environment. And the biggest reason that they don't do that, and the reason player elimination is a problem in Commander Magic, is that actually what happens if you eliminate this player is that now they're just out of the game for a game that may last 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 additional minutes, depending on the power level, capability, and deck strength of the other players involved. And so player elimination, while allowed by the rules of the game, is heavily discouraged because it knocks players out. For all of these reasons, we probably, if we're making a casual focused 3v3, then MOBA-RTS, we will want to remove player elimination. Now, I will say again that if you were to make a more compelling, hardcore tournament organized, or with emphasis towards tournaments 3v3, you would want player elimination, because actually one of the benefits of player elimination is that the game ends quickly and it tends to snowball because the combined resources of teams tend to be more and more effective against their opponent the more players they eliminate. I mean, think about it logically. 3v3 is a 1-to-1 ratio of your resources to your opponent, but if you're 3v2, you have 1.5 versus 1 of your opponent, and if it's 3v1, then obviously you have 3v1 your opponent. And so these things tend to cascade a la Lancaster's law towards the game actually ending. But if your goal is to be casual, which is an essential component, right, we're just actually going to drag this down here and make sure that this is understood for everyone. So if your goal is to make a casual MOBA RTS, right, and you have decided that that is a goal that you are willing to have, then the first thing you have to do, I mean, that's not the first thing I would do, but the first thing that you have to decide to do by making it 3v3 is whether or not there's player elimination. And player skill focus And the player skill is casual. And now we have to define what casual means, but basically, I'll boil it down. Everyone who's upset that the campaign isn't doing really well in Stormgate, and everyone who doesn't play 1v1 ladder, or if they do, they play some custom matches with their friends because they're actually at such a poor MMR and investment level that that's the only player that they can play against. Those are what I would define as casuals. Casuals are not amused, and I have seen in casual formats players who see that player elimination is part of the game willingly choose not to invest in player elimination because they actually don't want that social atmosphere, that social confines to actually be ruined. I know this is anathema and completely curious and just a weird oddity to a lot of competitively minded people. Now, here's the thing, okay? Now we just spent a little while talking about things that everyone is now going to tell me because this is the way that thinking works. Everyone's going to tell me, well, obviously, Atano, we wouldn't want player elimination or casual game mode. Why'd you have to take 10 minutes to explain that? Okay, so let's get on to things that you actually would need a couple of minutes to explain, right? So, here's the first thing. If I am Frost Giant Studios, I would not allow this to be called a MOBA RTS. The first thing that you actually need to do before you make a MOBA RTS is you need to rebrand. Now, that's going to be an insane proposition for some people. It's like, wait, first task, rebrand. Now, why would you have to rebrand? So here's why you would have to rebrand, and don't call it a 3v3 MOBA-RTS. And for anyone who's watching this in the YouTube, you're going to understand why in a second, but for anyone who's not, you're going to be like, well, why is it that he's just got a giant line through MOBA-RTS? That's a completely terrible idea. What does he mean right now? Well, it's the same color. Like, you can figure it out from context clues, but if not, watch the video. So here's the idea. MOBA and RTS communicate different fantasies to one another. So I watched a GDC talk, and it speaks to my own experience, right, and what I've seen of more casual and competitive players, but especially casual players. And the important thing is that the reason that you have genres is that genres communicate fantasies. Okay? This is the biggest reason that you have a genre. This is why you call yourself a third-person shooter. Why do you call yourself a first-person shooter? Why you call yourself a MOBA? Why you call yourself an MMO? For instance, a brand can also communicate a fantasy. So I'm just going to go ahead and show an example of this. Final Fantasy XII is actually a pretty solid JRPG. The problem with Final Fantasy XII is that it was called a JRPG and has the brand name of Final Fantasy. So people are expecting something more like Final Fantasy X, or if they're just completely lost to cause and humanity, they're expecting something like Final Fantasy XIII. Now, the problem is that Final Fantasy XII was called Final Fantasy, so its brand is communicating this kind of turn-based combat that has, a grand narrative that goes forward, doesn't really have many open world aspects, right? But Final Fantasy XII was seen as a bad Final Fantasy game because the genre it was communicating by its brand name was not accurate. Now, similarly, let's think about this. If you think about it, a MOBA just means a multiplayer online battle arena. Pretty much every, WoW 3v, WoW 5v5, or WoW Arena, WoW is, WoW PvP can be a MOBA. Battlerite is a MOBA. Auto Battlers are a MOBA, right? Dota Underlords, for instance, is a MOBA, because it is multiplayer, there's two of you, it's online, that's how you're connecting, it's a battle arena, sure. Chess is chess that played on chess.com is a multiplayer online battle arena. But if you were to see chess called a MOBA, you would immediately have a very curious feeling about how wrong that was. Because MOBA is a genre, and genres communicate fantasy. This is why people are fighting over whether or not this thing is an RTS. By the way, RTS, a term itself, came from the 90s, was used as a marketing tactic when it first came out to differentiate from other games that existed at the time, and yet we are still using that same label 30, 35 years later. Maybe even 40. So here's the problem with calling this a MOBA RTS, right? Is because there's a conflict, a defined narrative conflict between the differing types of fantasy that are communicated here. So here's the fantasy of a MOBA. And by the way, you can disagree with any one of these points if you want to. This is more me giving out my thoughts, and then obviously if you disagree with my interpretation, you can take that on board from there. But I'm not going to entertain ideas such as, well, your definition is purely wrong, of the fantasy is purely wrong. It's like, yeah, I don't have access to some SCP Foundation oriented sculpting of the noosphere to understand what the Akashic Record says in the zeitgeist of people's minds and hearts when they hear MOBA as an online game. right? I'm sorry, I don't have that technology. But for those of you who aren't abnormal cretins, you can actually just listen to what I'm saying and understand the broader point. So a MOBA is purely an online battle arena, but the biggest fantasy of a MOBA is play with team, carry the team, right? Be hero. Honestly, MOBAs have something they're very, very similar to something like God of War, actually. Because in God of War, your plan is you are Kratos, you will be a badass, you will kill giant monsters and an unrelenting swarm of things that don't even matter because you could just combo kill them. You know, if you're Dante, what's the fantasy is that you're going to combo things into the ground, right? A MOBA, the primary fantasy of a MOBA is that you play with a team. This is an essential subcomponent of the MOBA, right? It's important that you play with a team because one, team play aspect is more casual. Secondly, it allows you to blame someone for the loss. But the biggest reason that you play with a team is actually that it allows you to stratify how you're doing in the game. Not just so 1v1, there's only one stratum. Myself and my opponent. Right, my relationship to my opponent. Am I better than my opponent? Then I'm fucking up to the moon, Kamina, Neon Genesis, Evangelion, fucking Ray opening up to the entire Earth's above my opponent. My opponent is a subhuman, like bottom of the barrel piece of dirt in the hole in the bump of the log at the bottom of the sea, right? But there's only one stratum. If you barely win an RTS, you're still or a 1v1 game, you're still all the way over your opponent, and your opponent's still down here. If you barely lose to your opponent, this might be the reflection of the game state, but the difference is actually this, because there's only one. It's binary. It's yes, no. Team is very different, because team allows you to identify where your skill set is relative to your not only your opponents, but a variety of opponents, but also to your team. So here's the advantage if you play a 5v5 MOBA, right? So if you play a 5v5 MOBA, you have 9 other players to compare. So this is how much you are the hero is 1 to 10 versus 1 to 1, and this 1 to 2. And this is why the team play aspect of MOBAs is very important. You could absolutely make a 1v1 MOBA that's called like Lane Kingdom or something like that, where you just practice laning phase, similar to some kind of aim trainer from other games. You just port in something that's close enough to what a hero is in Dota, in Smite, in in Dota, in Smite, in League of Legends, in Heroes of the Storm, right? You could do that, and you could play that, but that's not actually going to be successful because the primary agency, the primary fun of a MOBA comes from the fact that there is a team and there are groups of people you can compare your individual skill with. Now, this is actually why I think, right? Now, play with team is the first bit, but the second bit is carry the team. Now, here's the thing. Now, we have to go into all of this because these definitions are the suppositions that will generate the ability for you to design a mode, because whenever you're designing something, you have to think off the top, what are the highest order levels? What are the principality? Like, what is the max level of ownership that my idea belongs to? What's the biggest concept? And then it filters down based on whether or not it's that. Tim Kaine has an excellent talk about this, where he talks about quest design in Fallout, where they would have quests that would force a player to do something, and one of the essential high-level pillars of Fallout was we will not force the player to do anything they don't want to. They are allowed to do things in a variety of different ways, not just do the thing or it never gets completed. Right? And so that was a big hurdle for them to get over in quest design, but they had to do it because they were subordinate to this superseding principle, right? So we have, here we go. So we have play with team. Okay, we're just gonna change the color of these ever so slightly to something I can see. Okay, so there's that's really hard to see actually. So we're gonna have there's play with team. Next part, oh geez, is carry the team. Now here's why carry the team matters. We're just gonna delete that and then get it back up. But you understand what's going on here, right? Just give me a second. We're gonna correct this because at the end we're just gonna be able to scroll all the way down through the entire thing and show how everything we're doing lines up with all of this. So we're just going to go click, click, click. And then we're going to pink, and we're just going to draw like this for the text. And this is carry the team. Now, why is carrying the team important? Well, of course, in a 1v1 game, you are always carrying the team because you are carrying yourself. You are the biggest load on your team, and you are the hero and leader of your team. The problem is that people don't like that dichotomy. They don't like being the reason they lose and the reason they win before the game gives them an answer as to whether they've won or lost. One of the biggest fantasies of MOBAs is that not only do you play with the teams, you can figure out what your order is 1 to 10, but the idea is that you carry the team. And the reason this is important is that this is part of the hero fantasy. And I don't mean strictly heroes as in Smite. It could be an army battle, or it could be whatever it wants to be. So, but the goal in a MOBA is, like I said, to carry the team. And so it's actually, this is why I think in my, you can say it's my subjective opinion, but the market has borne out that people don't like this trait, although there are multiple other traits that were not to be liked about this game, which can be brought up and raised and etc. But if we talk about Heroes of the Swarm, right? So Heroes of the Swarm is doing worse than Dota, League of Legends, Smite, and a variety of other MOBAs as well. I think a large part of this, and again, I don't have access to the noosphere complex of the Akashic record of all human understanding of video game players everywhere forever, but part of the difficulty in Heroes of the Swarm is what happens in Heroes of the Swarm if you get a little bit ahead. Well, your team has 0.2 level up on opponent. Okay, so your opponent, so if you're stomping someone in Heroes of the Swarm and you make some crazy outplays, the result is that the team experience is shared, and that means that you're not actually carrying. Now you're making the plays that are allowing the game to progress in a way that's winning for your team, and it looks very satisfying, and that's great if you're a more experienced player, but there's not the moment of, I just put my elbow on everyone's throat and I stomp them to death. Right? That's what you're missing in Heroes of the Storm. Or Heroes of the Storm, I should say, not Swarm. I'm sorry. Even I got butchered by the thing. So being 0.2 level up isn't great. Now compare this to the insanity of Dota Heroes, where you can just have, you can just have 2 kills equals unkillable lane god, right? Or you can compare this to, season, we'll say season... I'd say season 2 to maybe about 5, probably 4. Season 2 to 4 League of Legends, if you just look at the way that the items worked and the way that power spikes worked. Think about, Paker's LeBlanc, right? Where he forces a competitive team to surrender live because he is shit stomping them that badly, right? That's the fantasy if you are making, if you're playing a MOBA. It's not to be 10th on the list and be carried. The goal is to be number 1 on the list and stomp everyone as hard as possible. You see this also in FPS games. One of the biggest reasons people complain about skill-based matchmaking, this is going to be a long video, one of the biggest reasons people complain about skill-based matchmaking in games like Call of Duty is that, yes, if you're a more casual player, if you're constantly hovering between 7th and 10th in these lobbies, or really, you're constantly hovering between the 20th and 24th best player in the lobby, or, if it's teams of 10 or teams of 6, you're really hovering between the 10th and the 20th, right? You're doing really badly. Yes, those players don't want someone to be a superstar hero and stomp the lobby because that makes them feel bad. But if you are the person who likes playing the game, the idea of carrying the team is built even into that team-based game mode, right, in those FPSs. So people don't like skill-based matchmaking because it makes it much less likely that they can have a skill disparity that allows them to stomp other people. This also means that the more casual players don't get dragged along for the ride. Part of the team fantasy, this is a corollary to carry the team, is that if you know the team can be carried, you know that yourself, you can be carried if you're not doing well or not living up to par. Someone can be the hero to go ahead and take it, right? You can either be the hero or you can be in Shrek 2 singing about how you need a hero, right? This is part of the fantasy. And then all of this, right, play with the team and carry the team, all of this is part of be the hero. And part of be the hero is actually about the idea of you being individually strong, right? So this is about nonsensical numeric advantage, right? This is what be the hero means in a MOBA. Right? So in a MOBA, let's think about this. In a MOBA, it's very rare. In most MOBAs, the gameplay filters down from play with team, carry the team, be the hero. And the reason it does that is that every time that you're doing something well in a MOBA, or you do it well enough, you get a gold advantage. You get something like a gold advantage, right? You then convert that gold advantage into more items. Now think about what the items are that you get in a MOBA, right? You don't get in a MOBA, oh, you don't get, well, you're just ahead of your opponent. We'll show how this is in contrast with RTS in a section, in a moment. In an RTS, when you're ahead of your opponent, your army is bigger than theirs, and your economy is big. Your army is equal size, and your economy is bigger. Now, that's not satisfying to a MOBA player. A MOBA player doesn't want to beat you in lane and then see that you're dead and then be able to take free action across the map and then be able to collect some extra resources and attack your tower a little bit. No. Killing your opponent is good because it gives you gold. And then killing your opponent is good because it allows you to get gold uncontested. And then the translation is different in an RTS. When you have an advantage over your opponent, you will get more gold over time. You are able to take a fight that might kill your opponent or might make it difficult for your opponent to respond, right? But in a MOBA, your advantage is immediately a stat. It is a numeric stat. And part of Be the Hero is this nonsensical numerical advantage, right? Has anyone ever seen like a 500 stack Nasus, right? Whose Q just like eats a third of a Malphite in a single Q, or a quarter of a Malphite's health in a single Q, and they just ult, and they're just Q stomping the Malphite, and then everyone else has to die, right, immediately thereafter. I'm picking like very basic League of Legends champions. I mean, you can pick something like Gwen is immune is another facet of this. Anyone whose damage spike is so insane, like you've seen Nocturne Ori in a lot of worlds as of late, right? Particularly from Western teams. Part of being the hero is being Nocturne, right? You kill your opponent in an RTS, they're just off the map for a little while. In a MOBA, you get gold. Gold converts into more health, more damage, more stacks, more movement speed, more damage mitigation, more active abilities, more, right? The idea in an RTS is that when you win, you then make more. The idea in a MOBA is that when you win, you get more. And if you don't understand how get and win or get and make are different from each other, then you probably don't understand the phrase would like to have their cake and eat it too. Right? So I'm not going to entertain people who have that level of thought. So this is what a MOBA does. You play with the team, you carry the team, and you be the hero. So this is what people think of when they think a MOBA. Okay, so what do you think of when you play an RTS? Well, we're going to go through this a lot faster because we already talked about it, right? So in an RTS, you think in an RTS, most of them, there are exceptions. There are like free-for-alls of Command & Conquer Tiberium Sun, and there are people who play Company of Heroes 3v3, but let's include the perception of RTS is that RTS is a 1v1 skill slugfest, 1v1 skill, mechanical skill, 1v1 mechanical skill slugfest. Now, I've been top 400. I think it was 384 or something like that in Stormgate, and that was back when they had 5,000 people. That was even back during Steam Next Fest when they had 88,000 people on the ladder, and I was top 0.5%, right? And I'm still shit. I'm not great. But my point is that I have some idea, some embarrassed notion between that and watching replays and talking to other more skilled players about this that you have seen publicly and that you have not seen, because crazy concept, you can reach out to people and talk to them in a space that other people don't know, right? The perception of an RTS is that's a 1v1, 1v1 mechanical, right? Mechanics, 1v1 mechanics slugfest, independence. Now, here's the problem with that and how this does not mesh. Now, I know that there are team-based RTSs, but if you look at the way those team-based RTSs are played, they are actually played as a series of time-sliced 1v1s as opposed to playing against an entire team, right? And I include things like Company of Heroes for this. So let's just go into this. So the primary perception is that, first and foremost, RTSs are 1v1. Now, I've explained this to somebody before who didn't understand the appeal of an MMO like WoW. They said it's just a Skinner box, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, BF Skinner had a test where he just found that rats would continuously hit for dopamine, let's say, rather than get something more essential like food, right? Now, the main problem with this being 1v1, or the perception of it being 1v1, right, is notice how, first off, this clashes with all team moments of MOBA, right? It just does, flat out, right? So play with team, there is no team. And part of the appeal of a MOBA is that you play with a team so you can see how you rank amidst your team and against the enemy team. Carry the team. Well, you don't get to, the team equals me for Fens. My gosh, that's a word that you won't see on YouTube every day. Team equals me for Fens, displacement of agency. So if the team is me, then that means that somebody else is not to blame. It's only me, and it's only me and myself. And that also means in 1v1 games, there is this concern that all skill is exacerbated. And the reason skill is exacerbated in a 1v1 game is that there is no one who can make up for your skill in that area, right? If you have, let's just give an example. Like if you have poor army control and plus good macro, and this is Lancaster's law, by the way, is the idea in warfare that if someone is slightly better than you, they are amazingly better than you. You actually have, it's that whole styles make fights things that you hear about in wrestling and in MMA. So if you have, if you have poor army control and good macro, and your op has great army control and good macro, well, I got some bad news for you. You are going to lose probably 90% of those games, right? You know how games like Magic the Gathering are moving towards a more casual format or more casual game modes, and will create cards that have more and more things that say, on enter the battlefield, do this thing that has a permanent result. On enter the battlefield, do this thing A, B, and C. On enter the battlefield, or every time you take basic game action, get more resources, right? This is anathema to an RTS, and that means RTSs are anathema to MOBAs. So when you describe an RTS, a MOBA-RTS, you know why there's not an audience for it, is that there can't be, right? I mean, this goes into the mechanic slugfest that we talked about before. Yep. This goes into the mechanic slugfest that we talked about before. This also goes into... this also goes into, oh my gosh, I just lost a little bit up there. You know what I was saying. Basically, what this means, right, all of this is that actually you just don't have an ability to merge these two because the fundamental fantasy of them is different. MOBAs emphasize the team. RTSs, even if they are a team game, emphasize the responsibility of the individual. The only RTS that I know of that didn't emphasize the responsibility of the individual was the attempted Archon mode. But Archon mode was a misunderstanding of what casuals like. The understanding from people who made Archon mode and thought it would be very popular is that, casuals don't like it when they get skill gapped 100%. So we need to be able to put them with a stronger player. That way they can have things that they like doing and they can enjoy, and they can play with the stronger player, right? Actually, that's not what happens. Casual players don't like that they have less responsibility, less agency, and have to listen to someone who is much better than them over the course of Archon mode. What they would actually like is to have agency, have impact, have responsibility for contributing to the team, and they would like it, instead of being 2v2 secretly being 1v1, they would just like it to be 2v2, right? So basically, you cannot call your game a MOBA RTS, and I'll just put this down right here. And the reason we crossed it out at the beginning is that MOBA RTS is not a genre, and the reason is fundamental conflicts in vision. Okay, we have talked for 30 minutes or something like that. Yeah, hey Mexation, how's it going, man? I'm glad you like this. So, MOBA RTS is not a genre because there's a fundamental conflict in vision, right? A MOBA wants a team so that you can stratify who gets to play against who, and you can see, I have a 1v1 responsibility, but it's not for the majority of the game. I can be worse than this player, but still better for the team. My team can still win, even though I'm worse. In RTS, there is none of that. There is no ability to displace agency. All of your skills get put on exact blast, and even if you play against someone 1v1 in a 3v3 game. Usually those games, like Company of Heroes 2, will cause you to spread out such that there are 3 players on your team and there are 3 points that you want, or 2 players and 3 points that you want. But really, it is very rare that you are playing RTS mechanics against 2 other people at a time. You are playing RTS mechanics 1v1 at a time. Compare this to League of Legends. What happens in League of Legends, right? Depending on your MMR, laning phase is somewhere between 6 to 12 minutes, right? This just depends on what the MMR is, what the skill level is. I say 6 because, if you lane swap and immediately have a 4-turret dive on somebody, and you know that example, then you're probably not actually playing a full traditional laning phase. Okay, that's 6 to 12 minutes. What's the average League of Legends game? About 25 minutes. So more than half of the game, sometimes as much as 3/4 of the game, is spent on you playing you as a member of your team against the other team. There are 1v1 moments in there, but you don't get relegated to the side. The team fight and how you play around the team concept is more important. That's why there's a lot of people who are hard stuck diamond, hard stuck plat, who have an amazing laning phase, and it's actually pretty damn solid, but they actually can't play any part of the game outside of it. This is also why you see people who seem to have really bizarre ability to play the game, but once it gets to a more open gameplay level, they're just shit stomping it, because it turns out actually the team concept is more important. So what I'm saying is, do not call, if you're making a 3v3 RTS, don't call it that, right? Don't call it that. It's literally the worst marketing, because you are signaling to both groups of people that their favorite genre is going to be combined with a genre they think is shit and is anathema to what they want to play. So don't call it an MOBA RTS. So the first part here, the first step is marketing. I can't believe I'm saying that, because I hate it when people say that, but it's actually true in this case. And so what do we call this new game mode that we're going to call? Okay, let's just lower this down a little bit. Let's go ahead and give it some extra size. So introducing the game that I'm going to be designing here, right? I hope you like this, because this is just going to, Mexation, this is not going to end. One second. That has to go. Let's see, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. So we'll just put it here. There we go. Now your name is up there. There we go. Now we can see your chat. Hell yeah. Okay, so the first step is marketing, and the first step of marketing is actually to name this something that somebody would actually play. And the way that you do that is you call it a new genre. You ready for the name of your new genre? Right? It is a GRABler. It can also be a GRABler, right? Now, what the hell is a fucking... What the hell is a GRABler? This is an insane name. No one likes this name. You've never heard of this name. This doesn't sound like a real thing. Okay, so what does GRABler stand for? Why would I even entertain this fucking insane idea? Because the concept of the name is actually going to enforce what you are making, because it'll appear new to new people, which is very important. And what does this stand for, right? It stands for... Here we go. We're going to have to change colors here to make a point. So this is going to be a general recruitment army battler. And that's why it's called a GRABler, right? Now, here's the thing. Why would you do that? What's the point? Well, let's circle back to, now that you've called it a GRABler, let's think about what this is that is different than a MOBA RTS. First off, you get away from all of the stigma of what in the hell a MOBA RTS is. Because I'm going to be honest, to a lot of people, MOBA RTS just sounds like I'm making a game that's going to be a complete failure. Whereas a GRABler, who knows what a GRABler is, right? Second thing is, we already talked about how, the second thing is, we already talked about how you want to make 3v3 not have player elimination. So here's the thing. Think about how we can combine these things that we talked about previously, right? So remember, a MOBA, here we go. So remember, a MOBA player, I think a MOBA player wants to carry, right? Which means they want numeric advantage. And then RTS player wants their legacy skill. And RTS players on average want an army. Now, notice how these things actually do go well together, right? A MOBA player wants to carry. An RTS player wants to use RTS controls, yes, but really what they want is to make an army. You hear a lot of more casual RTS players, and they'll express to you that the problem that they have with RTS is that they couldn't do anything. Like, by the time they figured out how to make a supply depot, some asshole just came in with 3 Reapers and destroyed their entire mineral line. They were promised a almost 4x like slow buildup of army, and they get to make this whole beautiful castle and arrangement of their entire Sim City, and then they have a big old army and they have a big slugfest. Like, what a non-player of Warhammer 40k imagines what 40k is. That's what an RTS player actually wants. That's why you see a lot of people say, I like RTS games, but I don't like 1v1. It's because 1v1 speaks to winning the game, and RTS as a genre speaks to, you're gonna make an empire, and you're gonna have a shit ton of units, and you're gonna smash people with it, and it's gonna be great. You're gonna have units spread from sea to sea, and it's gonna just be an absolute shitstorm. So how do we actually make our Grabbler do that? So let's go ahead and go all the way. We had to do all this, explain all of this, so that I can explain what I'm about to say without putting in all the context that will make it sound reasonable. So let's grab a square, shall we? Here you go. Here's your map. You like your map? I know you like your map. That's why you're here. It's because it's a great map. It's fucking awesome. Now, here's the way that you would actually make a 3v3 MOBA-RTS, what we're going to be calling a Grabbler. Fucking legendary concept here, by the way. We're basically going to use the square of something like Summoner's Rift, right? Because that's fine. What you do, and this is already described, by the way, this is not... Yeah. Fair enough. Yep, fair enough. So what you do is you just go to shapes. Here we go. We have one nexus. Sick. And then over here, we have another nexus. Now, you can even have the MOBA setup, right? And the reason you have a MOBA setup is that there is no getting away from this. You can hide from this if you want. You can say that you're going to change their minds if you want. MOBA is a more popular genre than RTS. So you could make an RTS that has MOBA characteristics. What you actually have to do for a Grabbler is you have to make a MOBA that conforms to those. Just like how in the 90s it would have been ridiculous for you to get away from RTS mechanics and RTS gameplay loops because that was a more popular genre because gaming was... Listen, there's a whole variety of reasons. The very short version, as I understand it, is that there were fewer people who were called gamers because they were more ostracized for being that. It was seen more as a niche and as a weird hobby than actually something that just everyone does matter-of-factly. And so RTSs were almost embraced for the fact that they were more difficult, much in the way that the anime community in the early 80s and 90s was quite... how shall we say, and even early 2000s was quite invested, whereas now it's pretty normal to see a normal looking dude who's just wearing a Dragon Ball Z shirt rocking around. So you have to conform to MOBA schematics. So here's the setup of your map, right? You have to copy something like Leak because you have to give people that familiarity. You know how in RTS we talk about, oh, the control system has to work a certain way. We have to be able to set up hotkeys in a certain way because those are our genre conventions. Well, you have to listen to the genre conventions of the gameplay because that's what's popular right now if you want to be successful, right? That doesn't mean you have to abscond with all of your principles and just do whatever they do one for one, but it means that they have some good ideas, and you're kind of a fool if you stick your head in the rut of 2009 and say that, nah, we don't have to practice that. So we're going to use this to represent the lanes. So the lanes are going to look something like this. We're going to draw them with lines because, you know, I am not quite the drawer that I used to be. Obviously, you know, oh, look, have you ever seen this before? I'm sure you have. Look, it's mid lane, bot lane, and top lane. Insane concept. Insane. Now, the reason you do this is that you give the MOBA player an understanding that you are adhering to their genre conventions. You even see Deadlock do this, right? I mean, Deadlock is made by Valve. They could do literally whatever the fuck they want to. What did they decide to do? Oh, just follow the genre conventions. Okay. Here we go. So we're just going to draw this. Now, this is not just, bro, just call it something different and have different lanes, right? So we're going to get into it. So here you go. You have your 3 lanes. So now, you still push in this. If you were playing a 3v3, you could have 3 lanes. You could also have 2 lanes. So we're just going to write over here that you could also just have 2 lanes over to the side, right? And 2 lanes might even work better for what we're going to describe here, okay? So instead of 3 lanes, let's just make it really, really nutty, really simple. I'll just draw them with pencil. So you have 2 lanes, right? If this is going to look like Twisted Tree Line, guess what? You're right. Okay, now ignore the fact that this is not perfectly drawn. I am not an artist. I am a dabbler. I am a conjurer of cheap art tricks, as it were. Right? So we're just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, cool. So these are the 2 lanes. And what that means is everything outside of these 2 lanes are some kind of jungle area. And this is comporting to the expectations of MOBA players. So now that you've got that, oh, let's make it a dark. Can we make this a green that doesn't offend the eyes, please? Can we make it a green that doesn't offend the eyes? Can we make it a green that doesn't offend the eyes? Fine, there we go. Okay, so the rest of this is jungle, right? It's some variant of jungle. Obviously, this area around here is perfectly fine, but okay. So now what do? Well, keep in mind, what MOBA players want is they want an incremental increase. They want their kills and their rewards to manifest directly in the result of them having more of something. They don't like the idea that when they win, they then win. They don't like the idea that when they win something, they then have to take advantage of it in some way. They like the advantage of, when I have gotten this thing, I just win with this thing now. Okay, so here's your map setup because you're comporting to the expectations of MOBAs. How does the gameplay actually work? Well, what we do is we just follow the MOBA logic for the setup of creeps and for the setup of towers to a lesser extent. Now, why do we do this? Because it gatekeeps the, or not in that way that most people mean it. It stops the game from ending in a manner that feels premature, and it adds a certain amount of longevity. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw some towers here, right? Just to give you an indication of like, oh shit, there's a tower, there's a tower, there's a tower, there's a tower. They're obviously owned by different people, and if you really want, you can have like here's the storm style, deadlock style supergate over here, and it doesn't even have to be, it could just be sets of 2, right? Like what we've got over here. So here you go. Here's tower 1, here's tower, super defensive tower 2, right? This is perfectly fine. Now, this doesn't explain the gameplay, but we are, again, because we're following the conventions, going to do what are done in the other games. Pretty simple. What you do is you just have minions spawn. Now, people are going to say, well, this is just a MOBA at this point. Hold your horses. Calm yourself, right? We're getting there. These things take time. Okay, so what you have now is you have a variety of little, units that come out and they get over here and they attack here. I'll just draw a little bit bigger. So you have a bunch of units and they come up over here. Now there's going to be a mix of melee and ranged. I will note that League of Legends has a cannon minion, though I don't think that's strictly necessary. I do think you go with more of the League of Legends way of killing creatures instead of having denial, because again, this is a more casual game. The reason Deadlock doesn't do it is that Deadlock is an FPS, and FPS traditionally has an environment and an audience that is more conducive to the idea of, or respects more the idea of, oh, I'm going to get skill gapped in some way. I have to be able to do this thing that is mechanically difficult. It's one of the few genres that allows you to do that. So what we're going to say here is, okay, well, we're just going to have minions, and they're going to attack over here into the center. This looks so far like a normal MOBA. Now, what about the players? What do the players have? This is where we're going to start using triangles, circles, and squares. So don't worry about it yet. I'll just use a star to represent heroes, but we have to go into hero design after this, because the first thing you do before you add heroes is like, okay, well, we have a basic MOBA map. It's a 3v3, so we have 2 lanes. This is intelligent because we want 2 lanes, 1 person on each lane, or 2 on one and 1 on the other, or 1 on each, and then we'll use this other area out here, this like jungly area, for whatever we want our jungle to be. But you may notice we've opened up a lot of questions, so we're going to answer some of those questions here, right? So you're making this, you have a 2-lane road. Okay, so heroes? So the first thing is absolutely yes. The reason that you have heroes is that heroes allow that MOBA fantasy of being the hero. Being the hero is not just having the status of one. It is actually playing as this champion, which confers on me the abilities of that champion in gameplay. So you absolutely do need a hero. However, for this GRABler that we're making, right? We don't actually, we have to think about how the heroes are oriented. So what we want is, the difference is, we have to think about, this is an intersection of economy. So heroes, absolutely yes. However, the heroes, that's an easy question. That's just duh. But how about the relationship between heroes, or strength of heroes? Now this is where we start making our first major departure from the MOBA genre, by putting in some of the RTS like spin and feel, and also this is a way of making sure that you have a quick one-line descriptor of what a GRABler is and why it's different than a MOBA and it's different than an RTS, and it creates a very different vibe, feel, game style, and won't attract people from those audiences, but might actually coalesce to form an audience on its own. So, hero, yeah, absolutely, yes, right? So, strength of heroes. So, in a MOBA, let's think about like how in a MOBA, the strength of heroes goes like this. You know, level 1 equals 1 power. When I say levels, by the way, I don't, let's just say power levels instead, okay? So, here we go. So, let's look at how this actually works. So the strength of heroes in a MOBA, we're going to use power levels rather than levels, because levels are a reserved term, and a reserved term means that it is used explicitly. That term is used to mean a very defined subset of material inside the domain at which you are attempting to apply it. So it is not appropriate for us to call what we're going to describe now as levels. Thank you, Reese's. What's up? Okay. So, there's no wrong way to read a Reese's. How a ton of circus fucking one-shots Reese's. So, I just ate it like normal.
So you're just playing.
Yeah.
You Pez dispensed it.
Yeah.
They can hear me, I don't care.
Yeah, I just wanted it. It was tasty.
Okay.
Yeah, we just did what we had to. So the strength of heroes, we're not going to use level because level is a reserved term. So what we're going to say is we're gonna call it power scaling. Hell yeah! Oh, you got them? Are they the little Halloween like pumpkin ones? Oh shit, awesome. So we're gonna call this power scaling, right? So at a power scale of, we're gonna say that a hero, like 45 minutes, yeah. Okay, so we're going to say 5 minutes into the game, or we're going to say 1 minute into the game equals 1 power scale, right? But if you're 5 minutes into the game in a MOBA, you might be at 2 power scale, but everyone knows that once you get to 10 minutes into the game, you're secretly at like, 6 power scale. And then if you somehow get to like 25 minutes into the game, you're at like 20 power scale. You see the relationship that's happening here? The hero itself is getting all of these stats that make it better and better. Now, what are the mechanics that do that in a MOBA? I mean, we'll go over them quickly. It's important because we're not going to be using a lot of them. And if you're not using something another genre is using or a convention is using, you have to offset it in some manner. So if the strength of a hero is determined in a MOBA by power scaling for things like items give levels, things like, items add to your power scale. Things like levels and abilities add to your scale. Typically, there's a binding relationship between them. As you get more levels, you can get more abilities, or you can upgrade the abilities that you have to make them more powerful. So items, levels, abilities add to your power scale. There's also buffs, right? And these are semi-permanent, or these are long-lasting or permanent buffs, right? Think of, can you capture Baron early in the game in League of Legends? No, you can't. But you can later, and it has, the Red Bull power, Baron power play is very, very strong for you. Elder Dragon, right? Getting Elder is a huge buff. Getting a Dragon is a buff. Getting a Soul in League, I'm using League of Legends because it's very popular. People know what that game is, right? So all of these things add to the power scale of heroes. So how do we actually want to make the strength of heroes work in our game? Well, we're not making a MOBA, so actually the relationship is going to be flipped here, right? So whereas in a MOBA, whereas in a MOBA, we're going to make it like we're going to make a chart here, right? So the way it works in a MOBA is that we've got this fancy chart, right? And the fancy chart for a MOBA is something like, and we're going to move this over. In a MOBA, it's something like, it's something like PS over time, right? We're going to make it something like, here's your power scale. Here's how much, your hero can do. And then we're just going to make this access time because, classic. So the way that this works in a MOBA looks something like this, right? When not a lot of time has, well, actually we have to replace those. Whoopsie. And we're just going to call this PS, I think. Yeah, we're just going to call this PS. And black. Yep. So the way this works in a MOBA is actually fairly well understood, even if you've never formalized it. And the way that it works in a MOBA is as follows, right? Let me move that back over here, and then we're going to go, yeah. So in a MOBA, as you go ahead and play more of the game, right, here's your time. As you play, it looks a little bit linear, but actually the more time goes up, the more your power scale just rises, right? So you actually make a curve that's like this, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, the more that you play in a MOBA, the more your power scale goes up and up and up and up and up until it's not quite a vertical cliff, but it's just like, it just keeps fucking going, dude. Like, the relationship is sick. Look at that. That's so awesome if you're a MOBA player. Whereas in an RTS context, it's not. It's more linear. So what we want, however, in our new game mode, in our GRABler, right? So we're just going to call this, like, our GRABler. There you go. And we're just going to change this, right? Is that we're going to copy this exact same idea, but here we go, and we're going to select, and the difference here is going to be that the power scale of the hero over time is actually not going to change, or it's going to very, very slightly increase if it increases at all. And we're going to have to talk about why that is. Can I just curse it? Cool, that's good enough. So the way this works in a GRABler, right, what we want is, instead of the heroes getting more powerful over time, we actually want the power level of the heroes to start something like this, right? And then it stays flat. And then after a certain amount of time, it increases. And then after a certain amount of time, it increases. Now notice that this step function is not nearly as fun or as satisfying or as explosive to being the hero as the MOBA progression. So how are we going to do this, and why are we going to do this? Well, this is because, whereas in a MOBA, let's look at the things that you get in a MOBA, right? The strength of heroes comes from items, abilities, items, levels, abilities, and buffs. What we want instead for our GRABler is we don't want that, right? What we actually want is the power level to come from, we want players purchase units. An amazing concept. Fucking amazing. It's just, yeah, RTS, it's MOBA, except MOBA, but you buy units instead of items. Now, here's the thing about this, right? Players purchase units. So let's think about some of the advantages of the way that items work. So the way that items work inside of a MOBA is that when your hero dies, you don't lose the item, right? The item is always a part of you. Even if you're super strong and someone kills you, you're not less strong than you were before. You keep that same level of power. So, like, it's something like, if you're playing in a MOBA, if you're playing, if your power level is here and you die, it's still here, right? And then if you play a little bit more and get stronger and your power level is here and then you die, it's only flat because you're dead and can't take more actions. Other people's curve can rise up to meet yours, but it's not like your curve actually goes down. You see, other people can be doing this. So that person who is worse than you, who started here, if they just don't die and they keep making proactive plays and they get a bunch of gold, they could be up here, and just keeping you down, tamping you down, actually allows the game to, allows them to catch up. But if you have this kind of relationship of the power scale, it looks like actually you don't have that at all. So what gives? Well, because you can purchase units, instead of purchasing items that stick to your characters, this is where you add in the reward for RTS elements. This also, however, has a big impact on the design of heroes. So what this means is that heroes are now static individuals. And why did I give them a pseudo step function right here? Well, it's because you still want the heroes to feel more powerful over time. You just want them to be less powerful than the army. So I'm going to give you a good example from the game Dynasty Warriors if you've never played it. Dynasty Warriors is a game where if you are playing on a middling difficulty or even a low difficulty, you're supposed to move with the campaign through and attack a bunch of armies and have your army attack theirs, and then your hero attacks their hero and you wreck the army, and then it feels great. They just have one tiny problem in Dynasty Warriors, which is that your hero is so much better and smarter than the regular person that the only threat your opponent has in their entire army is the other hero. And so what that really means is your army is irrelevant to you. Your hero can go thrash the opponent's army, and then at a certain time you just blow up their enemy hero or general or whatever, and then you're fine. We don't want that. So we actually don't want the heroes to be too strong, but we also want them to have some increase over time, because otherwise you have this really negative and unsatisfying relationship where, you know, the player perception at the beginning is, you know, player perception over time looks, you know, here we go. Player perception of heroes over time, right? We'll just go ahead and do this. So the player perception of heroes, we just clicked the wrong thing. The player perception of heroes over time looks like this if you don't have an increase. It's like start of game, awesome. Middle of game, nah. End of game, a useless sack of, well, you know, you're smart, you can figure it out. So this is why you actually give defined power spikes to the heroes. And these power spikes can correspond to making the heroes more powerful or more relevant over time. Now, but why do we want players to buy units? Why do we want them to buy units at all? And it's like, well, it just creates a very different vibe and a different feel, especially because heroes aren't carrying the weight. Your units and your army are. So remember what I said about the RTS Fantasy, right? For more casual players who don't, for 1v1 players, the fantasy is beat you in this game. But for more casual players, it's I want a giant pile of units. I want a big, like, giant army. I want to move over, and instead of having this army, I want an army, and I want to castle walls, and I want this beautiful structured out city, and I want to have like 17 bases, and they're all prearranged just perfectly, and actually this pylon wall spells the letter fuck. Like, you know, this is what I want before I go and stop my opponent. That's not a reality entertained by 1v1. But if you allow the player to buy units, then you get MOBA advantages out of this. So in a MOBA, if we're making a 3v3 and you have one defined nexus point at which your hero responds, by the way, this is the easiest part of the entire thing, but how quickly should heroes respond? It's super easy. 10 seconds plus, yeah, the death timer is 10 seconds plus in-game, or inane, in-game timer, 1 second, timer, minute timer in seconds. Okay, very easy. Oh, but my hero died. When do I get him back? This is super easy, guys. Come on now. He dies at 4 min, and that means he has a 14-second death timer. But it's 30 minutes in the game. Why? Oh, well, this is super easy. Then it's, you know, 30 min equals 40 seconds. And the reason that you do this, by the way, is the same reason that MOBAs do. And this is a problem that actually MOBAs have that RTS units don't have. So I've already introduced the idea, hey, just have the hero buy units instead of buying items. Now, why did we do that? It's because MOBAs have a problem that if you go back and look through early seasons of League of Legends, early implementations of Dota All-Stars, some very bad MOBAs that are out there, the problem that they have is this: MOBAs do not end. MOBAs have a very difficult time actually ending the game. Now, I know you're going to say, no, wait, they don't. Every MOBA game that I play actually does a correction. Every successful MOBA game that you play doesn't. And the reason they do this is that they have things like death timers that scale with the time of the game. They have things like, in League of Legends, they have like Baron and Sol or Rosham. Pretty sure it's Rosham, right? Not in League, but you get the idea. So think about this. Because the game doesn't end naturally, and we saw this if you watched early, like Season 2 to Season 4 of League of Legends, the death timers keep ramping up. Why? Because the more time that your team is 5v4 against the opponent, the more likely you can end the game. There's super objectives like Baron and Soul. Why? Because the longer it lasts, the more it goes on. There is usually some kind of, like in a game like Battle Right, which is technically a MOBA, but not what people think of as a MOBA. It's an arena battler, right? That game sometimes does not end. There's a reason in Battle Right the screen keeps shrinking down lower and lower and lower until eventually it closes up, right? And that's the reason. There are MOBAs where you can make your minions more powerful over time because MOBAs struggle to end the game because there is a certain mixing of heroes and game knowledge that allows a game to not end if there's not enough gold. Because again, the primary fantasy of a MOBA is that you can be the hero and you can carry the team. If the team unit is too strong, you might accidentally make team synergies, which are very hard to debug, very hard to figure out, and very rare because it requires a high level of game knowledge and gameplay from the other side. From both sides, actually, it can be almost impossible for MOBAs to end. But making it so that when you buy, instead of buying items, you buy units, solves this problem, right? Also note that, for people who say like, oh, actually, MOBAs have a pretty good time ending. Have you ever noticed that in League you can only get to level 18 and that you can only have 6 items plus a potion, like plus a 500 gold potion? Have you ever noticed that that's the case? If they actually wanted the game to end in a true stomp, what they would do is they would actually just uncap the levels, right? They would just make it so that you could go past level 18, right? And you just get a pure stat buff from levels 18 to 100. So you could just have a level 56 Ashe who like auto attacks 5 times per second like some 20th level D&D 5th edition rogue, right? And just go forth and stomp. But they don't. The caps that they put in on the levels and the items are to stop players from getting stomped too hard and it being impossible. But the consequence of doing that is that you've accidentally made it easier for the game to go on forever. But buying units makes that a lot easier. Now, why, again, like I said, for those of you who just joined, why do we make it in our GRABler, our General Army Recruitment Battler, a General Recruitment Army Battler? Why do we buy units instead of... why do we buy units instead of items? Because one of the big advantages of items is that when a player loses, when they die, they keep the items with them. Well, the big advantage is the thing that RTSs have always had, which is that RTSs are naturally disposed towards ending, right? This is fantastic. Hey, Silent Avenge, how's it going? So now we have to get into... so we know that we want to make it so that it is a two-lane MOBA style setup with with neutral minions, neutral, very important, that for neutral for your team, obviously, that move forward and attack, and then, okay, how do we want to gain gold and what do we use the gold on? Well, we already talked about one of the outlets of gold, which is going to be enemy units, but let's think about this too. How do we gain gold? Do we just want to use the League of Legends system? Yes, we just want to use the League of Legends system, which is a fancy way of saying that you give people a passive income over time. The reason you give them a passive income is that it feels very bad from it. So at an RTS standpoint, if I have no one mining, I shouldn't get any more money, right? I should just kind of lose if I don't have any workers. Like if someone Reaver drops me and then Storm drops me and then, I don't know, Scout drop, like just runs 50 scouts into my base and they just decide to delight in keeping me alive with 0 workers, I should have no economy. But the problem with that is the problem that MOBAs have, which is that because MOBAs don't end easily, they actually need a way to encourage the game to come to an end. And one of the ways that they do that is they also want, well, the other thing is they want to make sure that people who are doing badly don't feel shut out of the game. I disagree with that. So I actually, personally, no passive income, right? I personally would have no passive income, though I will say, you know what, probably to be more new player friendly. So we'll just have the passive income, and the rate is something like, oh my gosh, what's the rate in League? Let's see. 13 gold per 10 seconds. Yeah, I was going to say something like that. I was going to say like 1 every 2 or something. Like 1 every, yeah, 2 every 3. So So we're going to have 2 every 3 seconds. Another way that you could have this is you could just have the League of Legends format, which is 10G per, 13G per 10s. The reason that you do this is that you make sure that people who are more casual players don't want to hear I'm getting shut out of the game so hard that I can't buy anything and there's nowhere to go. So you do keep the passive income, and then also, you know what? Yeah, these creeps, minion, you have minion income as well. But there's another thing, because you can buy units that I didn't show you earlier that we could have in our map. So keep in mind, again, we took away the abilities of heroes to scale. Because heroes don't scale by level, we have to put in multiple systems to encourage the game to actually move forward. One of the major reasons that heroes are as weak as they start in League of Legends and become as powerful as they do is that it is a system of level gaining and ability ability improvement that goes with items to force the game to go up on this curve to actually ending. So if we've taken away the exponential growth that are part of it by items and turned it into buying units, yes, that is pretty damn good, but only if the opponent can leverage it. Whereas items, it's like, okay, it's just a stick stat. Just do the same thing you were always doing, except you have more stats to do it, to a casual player, right? Obviously that's not a refined or intelligent or high level perspective on this. So, but we've taken away the ability of heroes to grow. I'm going to take away the ability of heroes to grow in level, right? And so no hero leveling. Now you're going to say, how does the laning phase ever end, right? If we have no hero leveling. And again, the answer is that there's 2 answers. So first off, if we look at, power sources for heroes, obviously there's items, which are now going to be units. And then we also have removed leveling. And what do we replace it with? Well, you can change this with gold mine income. There is also another idea, which I'm not opposed to, which is you allow leveling, but default all ability gains. Now, why would we do that? That sounds insane. Why are we taking away so much agency from the heroes? And the reason we do it is this. If you have a hero and it levels automatically, you're taking away the agency of the person getting the hero point, figuring out what they want that point to go into, figuring out if they want to upgrade an ability or not, for a new player to read the ability and figure out what they want, right? What is the optimal configuration of these early levels and this scaling for me to set up? We're taking that away from them because we're giving them something that is far more complex. So remember, when you buy an item, you just own the item. You don't actually have to do anything with the item in something like a League of Legends, or in most cases, crossing my fingers, the examples that I'm thinking of right now, in Dota 2. Right? But it is a passive stat buff on yourself. What we're doing whenever the players get gold is we are allowing them to spend the gold when they're back at home to buy a unit. And the thing is that buying units means that the player's control now has to expand, right? So they're not leveling, or you could do the other way, right? You can do one of these 2 ways, right? You can either remove leveling, or you can allow leveling but default ability gains, right? And you could do one of these, and the reason is you're adding a ton of complexity in the army movement and unit control. But this gives both players what they actually want. A MOBA player is going to be attracted to this idea because they have gotten more powerful. They have converted their gold into something that will allow them more ability to leverage victory over their opponent and to do very, very well, right? And then if you think about it, so what is the purpose then for... but then we removed their ability to pick levels, but now they have this whole extra unit to control. And this means that we can actually now design RTS units, because they are RTS units. You can buy them and they take a build time, and then you can manipulate them as if they were a hero or any other unit. But now you can actually get into the nitty-gritty of how you would design these units to be complementary or antagonistic to various heroes. Now, there is one problem that you're going to have right away, which is, okay, but I don't gain levels, and I just gain economy, right? And the answer is, yeah, you gain economy. Okay, so why wouldn't I just, if I'm beating my lane opponent, why wouldn't I just continue beating my lane opponent, save a bunch of money, and then only get the units later? And here's the reason why. So, for anyone who's thinking about this, if you haven't thought about this, here's the thought line, right? Here's the thing to be concerned about. So, in a MOBA, in a traditional MOBA, right? So in a traditional MOBA, one of the strengths of adding items is that if you're in a traditional MOBA and you add items, there are passive stacks of effects and stats. And the benefit of this is that without additional control, and so the benefit of this is that without additional control, you can kill easier. You can kill more, right? So if I am a hero and I am level 1 and I have a 1 in strength and I go back and I buy an item and it's called the Sword of Ass Beating and it gives me +4 in strength, then the next time I use any of my strength-based abilities or do a melee, which probably goes off of strength, instead of doing 1 damage to my opponent, I'm doing 5. Now, you might ask the same question, why don't I just stockpile a bunch of gold and not spend it, and then, why don't I stockpile a bunch of gold, not spend it, and then get it later? It's because in a traditional MOBA, if you spend the money right now, you get permanent stat increases that can't be wrecked with in any way, and you can use that to beat your opponent over the head more and more and more and more and more, right? That's very, 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 very good. Because the more you beat them, the more you beat their minions, the more they beat your towers, the more gold you get uncontested, the more objectives you can help take, the more you can kill other opponents, etc. Now, in this kind of MOBA, right, in this GRABler that we're talking about, so if we're talking about like the GRABler, so you're gonna think about yourself like, okay, so, question, why buy units? And let's think about this, right? Because units, unlike items, can die. Items can be targeted, disproportionate, and then the other thing here, right, that's worth mentioning is disproportionate, downside to losing downside to losing units. So let's think about all of these things, right? So if you're thinking about this, how would you solve this problem? Units can die. So generally, when a unit dies in an RTS, you don't get it back, you don't get a refund, you don't get to have that unit come back and get revived somewhere. Maybe if it's a hero, it can be revived a la Warcraft 3, right? In the Altar of Storms or things of that nature, right? Units can also be targeted, and damaging them actually permanently, like, if you have to control them out of the fight, it actually makes it harder for you to have more damage and more efficacy in the fight generally. And then also when you lose the unit, it's just a permanent loss. It's just down. Now, the difference and the disadvantage of this, there's two ways to look at this. One, you can fix the disadvantage, right? I would not do this, right? So we're just going to do like what I wouldn't do. Ways to fix: 1, make the downsides okay. Now, I don't like this idea. I personally am not a fan of this, but if I was to play devil's advocate and say, like, I want to have a GRABler, this general recruitment army battler, I want to have MOBA-like orientation and heroes, but players can buy RTS units and control them, and they're of varying powers and whatever. We have not gotten into the nitty-gritty, nor are we going to get into them for this stream. I will have to do that later tonight, because I have to go in about 20 minutes here. But ways to fix: 1, but what if I can buy units? Now, way 1 to fix it is, you see all these downsides I see on the top here? You can fix that by saying things like, okay, units, when killed, revive. Okay? So what you do is you take that traditional RTS idea of there being a build time of a unit, and you say that when the unit dies, we're just going to revive it. It will rebuild automatically, right? Probably from, if I was to think off the top of my head, probably from a single structure, probably Nexus, right? And when it's killed, it revives after a certain amount of time. You don't have to spend more gold. This is a permanent army increase, right? And you just get that unit back. So even if your opponent kills it 1 time, they don't actually kill it. Now, this causes a lot of problems later with, like, large army battles, which is one of the reasons that I don't like this, because you start having to fix a problem that you break something to fix a problem, then you have to fix all the problems that it comes afterwards. If you say, like, oh, but units, unlike items, can be targeted. Okay, you could always just have, like, a Spirit Link shared health, between all of the units that you've bought. So if you bought, if your hero has 100 health and you bought, I don't know, fucking a peon that has, a little worker dude from Warcraft 3 Orc that has 50 hit points, not actually 50, but you know what I mean, then combined you all have 150 hit points, right? And so, yeah, your hero is tankier because you have that army unit. That doesn't actually solve the problem, though, because you would have to make it something like, oh, do it only when you're, when in proximity, so they can't just hide the units behind their bunker or behind their tower equivalent or something like that. Like, my point is that you can fix this, or the downside, you can just refund the spent money to the player. So what this means is that, okay, so I have, I had 1,000 gold, I spent 600 of it, and I bought a Tauren Chieftain wannabe, right? So I'm at 400. We'll just say you have 600 left. So I have 600 gold, I go completely broke, and I buy a Tauren Chieftain, and I control it like a fucking idiot, and it just goes and suicides into a tower and dies in the stupidest fashion imaginable. And we could just say like, oh, well, no problem. You just kind of like the time market ability, right? We just give you that money back over time. Right? Now, I don't like any of these solutions, right? Because here's the cost that you have. Remember how I said the fundamental fantasy, one of the 3 fundamental fantasies of a MOBA is that you want to be the hero. You want to be the victor. You want to be the one leading everyone in a glorious battle and shit stomping everything. And you want to see where you sit next to all of your opponents and everybody else, right? And that scale, that's why you want it to be a team game. So you can see how you're ranking amongst your allies and amongst your opponents and see where you fit in the sorting algorithm of awesome. And you want to be on the top of that. All of these things dilute that capability and dilute that eventuality and make it unreasonable. So we're going to do way to fix 2, which is the one that I prefer, right? Make units awesome. Now, here's the thing. This says, right, so you can either lower the downside or you can make the unit so fucking cool that you would love to use it anyways. Yes, it has all of these weaknesses. It does have the weakness of it can die. It does have the weakness of it can be targeted and CC'd. It can be subject to the weakness that you see in RTSs traditionally of, I had an army advantage, I split my army into 3 pieces, and then they just ate up that third over there and that third over there, and now I have a third of the army and I have nothing to pay for it. Yes, but you want those things because even though that feels bad for the player, it actually feels better for the player for that negative thing to happen and then the game to end soon after. Also, you can offset any number of bad feels that a player has by catering to that MOBA fantasy of doing awesome. Like, people will say the feeling of winning in an RTS is like nothing else that they've ever had. I don't doubt that most people have that, right, who play RTS games. But the overwhelming supermajority of other gamers feel that the best thing that they can do, the thing that makes the most satisfaction for them, is completely curb stomping somebody and the game ending immediately thereafter, right? And that's perfectly fine. So what you do is you just say, oh, the units are awesome, but they can die. But they're so good, you would want to use them. Right? So for instance, let's say that I spend 50 gold equivalent, right? 50 Illuminite, and I make a wolf. Well, if the wolf is just like a fast version with slightly more hit points than a scout, that kind of fucking sucks. That's kind of awful. Why would I want to use that unit? I'd pay 50 gold for a thing that can get easily killed and targeted, and it just goes boom, and everything is sad thereafter, and I didn't even feel awesome doing it. Yeah, that would feel pretty bad. But if for 50 gold instead, you got a roving pack of 6 scouts, and they have like a lunge ability or a pack tactics ability from D&D that says that if they're near other scouts, right? If they're near only allied scouts, then and near your hero, they do like +1. They get like +1 speed or something like that, and they just zip around and go. That would be fucking sick. That would be cool. I'm not saying that's balanced in the slightest, by the way. I'm not even talking about the meta idea of that. The point is, right? It adds awesome. It adds flavor to these things. Like, imagine a spellcaster that you buy that only has 1 spell. I'll give you an example right now from my home game. The mage has the ability Fireball. And if you buy a mage and then you cast Fireball and it just goes and it just churns the entire ground, and everything that's on it just like has blasting burn damage afterwards. He can only cast like 2 spells with his mana. He can only cast this thing twice because it costs like half of his mana to do, and it just makes this giant line of like, get wrecked. It just goes out the side, and you're like, oh, but I mispositioned my mage really badly, and he has a low movement speed, and then he just got killed, and I just spent 50 gold for this unit, and it died. Yeah, but I bet that is actually offset by the time that you cast that fireball ability, and it just plows through a bunch of enemy units, leaves them all with severe burn, like lasting damage over time, and just shreks them. So I like this answer, because remember, the units can be insanely awesome, because they have to carry the weight of there's no hero level advantage, and there's no leveling therefore of abilities. Now, you can have leveling of abilities, which is the thing that I introduced over here, right? So for instance, if we go up here, right, where I said, you know, in a traditional MOBA, the strength is like 1, 5, 10, 25 minutes into the game, they have a power scale of 1, 2, 6, and 20. What you can do instead of having this where the rich just get richer constantly, what you can do is actually tamper down the impact of heroes, right? So we're going to copy this again to make a point. So in our GRABler, we have our power scale over time, and we add in discrete increments, and we just say like, all right, it's been 4 minutes, or it's been 5 minutes. All of your heroes are now level, you know, your hero that had 3 abilities at level 1 each, yeah, they're now level like 6. Yeah, they just have whatever abilities they would have at level 6 as prearranged by us. Right? Now here's the reason that we do this, right? So in a GRABler, we have to copy the time. There we go. So in a GRABler, notice that we have the power scale is kind of almost a step function over time, right? It's like, oh, okay, you know, you can even pick any arbitrary value, right? Let's say you want the game to end in 20 minutes. At 5 minutes, all the heroes get +3 levels, and then they get another +3 levels at 15, and then they get another +3 levels at 20. But why are their abilities so flat? Because just like how the MOBA has, through the combination of unkillable units, aka items, and it has ability levels and abilities themselves and level scaling, right? Much the same way in a GRABler, we can do the exact same thing. Whereas this is for, here, I'm just going to write this. So this is for GRABler heroes, right? And you might say like, oh, that's not exciting. I don't want that for my heroes. But what if the trade-off in this GRABler, this general recruitment army battler, right? What if the trade-off for your units, your hero being step functioned like this, where it has a very discrete increment, and that means actually no matter how bad your opponent does, they can't get wrecked on the hero front. This is actually to be more casual friendly, because yeah, here's the thing about MOBAs. It feels great to be on top. It feels fucking terrible to be behind, because there's actually no way to come back from behind from a numerics perspective on your own merits. It's more on your opponent's fuck-ups. And they have to screw up really badly, because remember, MOBAs don't end easily or well, which is why everyone's bronze silver games, according to Reddit, last 45 minutes. It's because no one can catch a throw long enough to actually win the game, because MOBAs have a hard time ending the game. But if your hero does this, yeah, we lose some of that impetus towards ending the game, but the natural way that RTS armies and economies work encourages the game to end, especially if we take this chart right here for the GRABler, and we say, oh, for the heroes, it's a step function, I guess, and that's cool and all that. All right, so, but what about the units? Oh, don't worry, we got something special planned for the units. You ready? You're going to love this. Well, but how do the units, you know, like what's the unit power look like? There you go. There's your unit power. What you do is you even start them early, right? You start the PS or the power scale of the units up high early, and you just have this ramp up over time. And what this means is that just like in an RTS, where the impact of the economy between 2 players of competent level, or, you know, I just mean competent, not excellent, not top of the ladder, not in a tournament, just like competency, like, you know, middle of the average of the rank distribution pack, right? In an RTS, the person who has the bigger economic advantage is going to win. It's just a matter of how that plays out. Do they win because they have more money and equal army, or does the person with the larger army kill the person who's trying to go for the economic play, or tamp them down so much that they can't play anymore? So what we're doing here is we just make the units awesome. And this solves the first problem, which is, well, why would I spend money on units? Spoiler, that's the way to move the game forward. Okay, why would I use the units? They're a second thing, and it's difficult to control, and etc. You just make them awesome. You just play into the primary player fantasy of whatever that unit is, right? Like, imagine if Auralana, to use a Stormgate example, remember Auralana's cryo tanks, how that was an absolute joke, and everyone thought that was just absolutely beyond the pale, worthless to disgust, and hopeless in all regards, right? What if instead of Auralana's cryo tanks being a special ability that she has walking into the game, what if you could just buy the cryo tank? Now, you would say that unit is so shit, I would never buy the cryo tank. But if you had to buy the cryo tank for 150 Illuminite, let's say, right, is just what it ends up being in this Grabbler, in this 3v3 MOBA-RTS that's actually just an entirely different genre. Okay, for 150 gold, how long does that take? Well, you only get 13 gold every 10 seconds. Okay, well, how much do I get for... Let's say it's 1,500 gold, right? To put it in, like, BF sword territory. Well, what does this tank do? Oh, bro, when it hits, your units move at, like, 30% movement speed for a second. And you're like, that's fucking insane! Why would I? That's so broken. Nah, it's not that broken. Because I could have a I could have a ninja that has a teleport that once every 10 seconds can teleport into an area, and the first attack that it has, if it hasn't attacked in about 20 seconds, does like plus 50 bonus damage. So I could just snipe the cryo tank. That's even crazier. Why would you ever do that? That's insane. Oh, because I could just buy for 600 gold. I can buy this soldier, and he has an ability where units that are around him can't, they just can't use, he can actually just lock down that unit ability. Now, you're noticing I'm adding a lot of active abilities or one-use abilities to these units and making them hilariously overpowered. This has direct implications on the hero design, which is the heroes should overwhelmingly be less complex, which is why we remove the complexity of adding in abilities, adding in their own ability to level scale in some meaningful way, right? And why do we add the step function then? Isn't it just the same if we keep the heroes flat? Well, it's not, because if you play a game that feels like a MOBA, but your hero never gets stronger, the people who are playing it because they feel it feels like a MOBA will be disappointed and say that you have fucked up the primary aspect of the game, which is the hero fantasy, and you have. Another thing to do for units, well, you have to concern yourself with, but units can be, items can't be separated from their heroes, but units can be. Like, I could have, is it really a good thing if I'm playing this GRABler, this general recruitment army battler, this idea that I have like Dynasty Warriors style, a hero and an army with it, and if my hero is over here, and my army units are like over here, is this a good idea? Now, I would say I don't personally care about that, but I think that you can even work that in. So, one of the things that you'll notice if you go back and play Warcraft 3, this is an incredibly underrated aspect of Warcraft 3 from people who are playing it more casually, are the auras! The auras are sick! And the reason that auras are sick, by the way, is that auras give a benefit to the hero that encourages the hero to be with the army, right? And this is something that most people don't consider. So, yes, we have 10, right? Oh, we have 7? All right, I'm getting off in like 5 minutes, everyone. But we have more to do. I mean, I'm going to have to upload this to YouTube. We just took this entire time to go over just basically the first half. The first third, talking about why you can't just call it a MOBA plus an RTS. The second, like the last 2/3 of it, are about the relationship of heroes and then introducing tentatively the idea that you could add in some extra units. But I want to add in this last little thought, something to think about for the hero design, is that when you design these heroes, you could take a page off of Warcraft 3. Most of the heroes in Warcraft 3 have 3 abilities and an ultimate, which we're going to separate because, it's just convenient for me that way. Of the 3 abilities, it is pretty common for one of those abilities to be a passive ability. Now, why is that? Let's think about what the average gameplay looks like of a good-sized army battle in Warcraft 3. You have a lot of spellcasters in the game, and a lot of units that have abilities even if you wouldn't qualify them as spellcasters, like Raiders with Net and Kodos with their ability to eat units, right? And that's to say nothing of things like priests and sorceresses and obviously the heroes themselves. But it looks like the soft cap on non-ultimate abilities is 2 abilities. And so why do they have this passive third ability? Why do you have Thorns on Keeper of the Grove? Why do you have Brilliance Aura on the Archmage? Why do you have True Sought Aura on the Priestess of the Moon? And the reason that you have all of these things is that it provides a reason for the units to stick together with the hero. Because Warcraft 3 was another game that was concerned about the RPG RTS style, as Grubby called it, right? This idea of sticking the hero together with the army, having them go together and back each other up. And there was still a concern, even after upkeep and even after hero experience, that you might be encouraged to leave your units separate from your hero to do something, and the developers wanted so much for that not to be the case that they added in auras, and auras tell all of your units near your hero, hey, you're better with me than you are not with me, right? You know, and this is something that you could do with the heroes when you design them for this game. Rather than make them have 3 abilities and then have all these super goated units with 1 ability each or 1 interaction each that you have to control and manage such that it ends up feeling like some kind of Protoss late game super nightmare, right? What actually happens is if you have things like auras that encourage the army to be near the player, then it is actually an interesting choice. You're encouraging which direction the choice happens, but it's interesting, you know? Here is your hero right here. Your hero is a star because everyone here is a star, yeah. Worst star ever, by the way. So here's your hero. Maybe, you know, I do want my guy to be over here and over here and over here, but they're not getting the advantage of a passive benefit that they would normally get if they were stuck to my hero. And these can be things that are already in the game, like if you want excess energy growth for Castile, or you want passive unit healing or passive armor gain on Blockade, or you want Amara to increase DPS, or things of that nature. Again, we're saying this agnostically to Stormgate, but this is definitely something that you can do for the creation of these heroes, because if it is a general recruitment army battler, right? Recruitment and army are half of the acronym. So you're emphasizing the army aspect and using the hero as kind of the general to make the medicine go down for more MOBA affiliated players, just like we're using the map to help the medicine go down for those more MOBA affiliated players. So a very last thought before we go is, again, general recruitment army battler, right, is an actual MOBA RTS hybrid. It's a MOBA where instead of buying upgrades, instead of buying items, sorry, my nose is killing me. Instead of buying potions and instead of buying things like this, items, you end up buying army units. You can make the army units incredibly compelling. You can use the complexity and the micro and the power of these units to de-emphasize the relative micro complexity and requirements and power for the heroes. This means that you don't have to have the heroes have the same ability level up, and this can still exist in a framework that feels very MOBA adjacent while rewarding players who have RTS skills. This is only, over the course of an hour and a half, an extremely high-level overview of my concept for how you would create this 3v3 MOBA-RTS / this 3v3, this GRABler game mode. I'm going to have other streams that explain how you could do this. We haven't even touched upon things like what is the relationship of heroes, what are some example heroes you could have, what are some units that you could have, what are the relationships those units can have with each other, what does the economic cost of these things look like, what does the jungle look like at all if you are using this kind of MOBA style, what does all the space in here look like, how does expanding work or does it work? I'm going to leave you with all of those thoughts, and we're going to have to come back for, I guess it's basically a second episode to actually get into what all of these things are. But I have a lot of cake that I have to go eat right now, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So with that, take care, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one.